Pacific Island nations are among the most at risk from the impacts of climate change, yet the least responsible for creating the problem. They were the first to call the world's attention to the very real present-day threats to people, places, and culture that the climate crisis presents. Throughout the decades since, they pushed for loss and damage funding. They pushed for ecocide to be treated as a crime by the International Criminal Court, and for the International Court of Justice to deliver an opinion on the state obligations and legal implications of climate change, which is currently taking place. These big ocean states were also the first to demand a phase out of fossil fuels, including most recently bringing the call for an official mandate to negotiate a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to the UN, including here at COP28. So join us now for a discussion with Pacific Island civil society leaders about this journey and next steps to advanced action around a just transition. So back over to the Dubai studio where Nick Nuttall has some very interesting guests lined up.
Thanks, Katerina. Yes, three more absolutely terrific guests from the Pacific Island region, and we're absolutely delighted to have them here with us. I'm joined on stage by Sharella Fruan. Sharelle, yes. Okay. Interesting spelling of that. Okay, it's always fun to play this game, right? Can Nick get it right or not? Sharelle, okay. Pacific Treaty Champion, Samoa, Aotearoa. Aotearoa. Okay. What does that mean, by the way?
New Zealand. It's the
white cloud. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. You're from Samoa with ancestral ties to Tokelau and Tuvalu. As a Pacific climate warrior, you acknowledge the importance of amplifying the voices of youth and marginalized communities, weaving indigenous, racial, and gender justice into the climate narrative. We've got Gemma Nelson. That's a bit easier for me. Diplomatic advisor, Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, Samoa, New York. And Gemma is an early career ocean professional and Ocean Voices Fellow, experienced in providing legal advice and support for Pacific countries' engagement at the United Nations, in particular in negotiating treaties. And last but not least, wow, this is going to be a tough one. Okay, Tiana Hua Yachevich. Okay, Fossil Fuel Treaty Champion, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a co-lead. Tiana has a background in leading indigenous grassroots climate advocacy. Thank you very much indeed for all three of you being here. So maybe we can kick off, Gemma, with you. What can you tell us about the origins of the movement and the diplomatic work that Pacific governments have undertaken so far, and how past climate leadership has led to these moments?
Thank you, Nick. So I think when we talk about the past leadership of Pacific leaders, we have to go back to the negotiation of the Paris Agreement and the securing of the 1.5 aspirational target, which it's still an aspirational target under Paris. Pacific leaders, political leaders at that time recognized that in order for our islands to survive in this new era, we needed to cap emissions, cap warming at 1.5 degrees. As you know, in the Paris Agreement, the actual limit is 2 degrees with an aspirational target of 1.5. As time has gone on through our engagement at previous COPs, and also our engagement throughout the multilateral space, I think others are now recognizing that 2 degrees is not bearable, that 1.5 is the absolute limit. What we know now from the global stocktake, as well as just science data reports that are coming out, 1.5, we're far off course for charting that. Not only the global stocktake results is that we are behind on commitments that have been made, but we're also very far behind on the ambition that is needed to meet 1.5. Pacific leaders are now realizing this. We're seeing every year worse and worse storms, worse and worse cyclones. In fact, in Vanuatu this year, I think we had the earliest storm, tropical cyclone category 5 to hit Vanuatu. We're seeing those changing climate patterns having a real impact on our people and our planet. And so this is one of the reasons why Vanuatu, Tuvalu, we are the first countries to come forward and call for this global governance framework to really force or to really bring the countries together to start negotiating a treaty that can phase out fossil fuels, which are the main driver of climate change. So building on the leadership that we've shown in the past in the climate space, as well as in general international law, a new treaty is the natural next step if we want to secure 1.5 for our islands to survive.
Thank you. Cheryl, from your experience, can you tell us how the work of Pacific grassroots campaigns contributes to the work your governments are doing? Could you also tell us a bit about your experience with grassroots movements in the Pacific?
Thank you, Nick. It's Sherelle, actually.
Sherelle.
Yes, you got
I'm going
it.
to try really hard with this. I'm sorry. We're just rolling with guests every 30 minutes.
No, of course.
And it's so hard to just keep one's brain focused on the pronunciation.
No, thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, I guess just touching on what Jim has shared about the realities of what climate change looks like in the Pacific. I think growing up in Samoa, having climate change be a part of our daily realities, experiencing flash floods, experiencing an increase of tropical cyclones, experiencing sea level rise, it's hard not to become an activist. It's hard not to join a grassroots movement. My mother, she worked for SPREP for 15 years, which is the Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. They actually have a pavilion here at COP. It's the Moana Pavilion. It's B3, Building 29, if you'd like to visit. And so I very much feel like I've grown up in the movement. And I think that for a lot of Pacific and Indigenous young people, they're almost born into the movement, forced into the space, because what other choice do we have than to fight for our islands, our ancestral homes, our traditions, our survival? I think for a lot of Pacific grassroots movement, youth in general, youth in particular, we don't have a choice other than to innovate climate solutions to protect our lands from the destruction of climate change. We don't have choice than to advocate, than to demonstrate, than to take up space like at these international conferences such as COP, and to really give a face to the climate change story. I think in the Pacific climate space, we're also very fortunate that our Pacific leaders are complementing the work that we're doing at the grassroots movement. And that's evident in the fact that 8 Pacific Island countries have already endorsed the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I think it's a great example for others here at COP to follow.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And by the way, you're right. I mean, SPREP, the South Pacific Regional Environment Program, I used to work for the UN Environment Program as the Director of Comms, and we used to work with SPREP, and they do really good work on limited budgets, right? I mean, they need more funding, and it's absolutely clear, but they do pretty good work. Tiana and Gemma, you both have extensive experience in the multilateral space, from climate change to the United Nations processes. What do you see as the potential pathway forward for this initiative, in other words, the treaty? And what is needed to turn these campaigns and agreements into real action? Yeah.
Well, okay, just to go first. So preface, my background is as a legal advisor, so I come very much from that technical point of view. In order to realize the ambition that Pacific countries and now others are also asking for at COP, one of the things that we need is we need stronger science, we need reports and the data to inform the decisions and to inform what this future instrument could look like. Where are the areas that it needs to target? How does it need to address those? And part of that how is also why. Why are we taking certain actions in certain areas? And it needs to be effective. So part of that, answering that why, is that we need a diversity of voices. I think we all understand and we all acknowledge the Pacific, as others have said, are the least responsible for the climate crisis. We are not here, we cannot solve it on our own. This is a movement that needs to be, that we need other voices in, from science, academia, indigenous peoples, vulnerable communities, but also other countries, those who are producers, those developing countries with interests. You know, this train is on the tracks. We already know from our people, our citizens on the ground, grassroots movements, this is a call that they want. This is going to happen whether or not they're there or not. So we need a diversity of voices. We need the science and the data to inform the decisions that that need to be made. And we also need that political push. So that political push is obviously coming from the the 8 Pacific Island countries, but also Antigua and Barbuda, Timor-Leste, and now Colombia. Those last 2 are producer countries. They are providing that political push that we need to galvanize momentum around this instrument.
And cities too, by the way. I had the mayor of Bonn on the show this morning, and of course I think they were one of the first German cities to sign this new treaty. So,
yes.
What's your perception?
Yeah, just to build off what Gemma has said, I think in how we see this campaign successful is building off small momentum. So from cities all the way up to organizations and countries, and also aligning the political will with the needs and desires of the grassroots activism and momentum that's building. And that's how and where we've seen success so far.
Yeah, yeah. It's, so Tiana and Sherelle?
Yay.
Hooray! I've been sitting here thinking about that for the last 10 minutes. I'm thinking I'll probably mangle it when I do it again next time. I was thinking quite a lot of pressure there. While you're both engaging in the multilateral space, you're still working in your communities and for your regions. So what do you think needs to happen to realize the aspiration of a fossil-free Pacific? It's possible, isn't it? It's very possible.
Yes, I can start here. So in Aotearoa, we have not long launched our campaign. And while we have just had a new government come in, what we realise and what's most successful with this campaign is aligning the movements, grassroots movements, to meet the needs and moments of the communities that in the places that we serve. So in Aotearoa, our new government wants to repeal the offshore oil and gas ban, and should that be successful, then this campaign will not be successful. And so what we're doing in Aotearoa is aligning the support with the grassroots Indigenous peoples there, because this transition is not successful if we continue to platform countries and people that continue to produce the problem.
Yeah, I guess just building off of what you said, Nick, it is possible for us to achieve a fossil fuel phase out. But like Gemma said, we can't do it alone. And our Pacific Island leaders have already shown the political backbone that it takes to endorse something like a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And they've come out publicly and committed to this treaty. So I think now we need those most responsible for the climate crisis to follow suit and to show that same leadership.
You must have solar, you must have wind. I was talking to somebody earlier from one of the renewable energy organizations, and we were talking about my little dream, which is I'd love to see, ocean renewable energy really surging forward. And she was saying that she was starting to see some real interest growing, particularly among islands, because being surrounded by ocean. And so, I mean, the potential is absolutely huge. With the right investment, the small islands in the Pacific, but also the Indian Ocean as well, and the Caribbean, could be, fossil-free very fast with the right investment.
If I can just quickly mention then, I think that's a really great springing point for the work that the initiative has been doing. So we've commissioned a report, it's called the Kimua Report, and it details of the pathway for 100% renewable energy for 8 Pacific Island countries. Part of the reality of living in developing countries, but also small island nations, is the very limited capacity that we have to execute certain plans. It has been a dream of many countries. I think Samoa, actually 5 years ago, declared to be 100% renewable. So executing that, having the policy and the data that you need to make those decisions and to realize that plan is really important. So that was part of the work that was done under the Kimua Report. So the first volume is out. 8 countries are on it. I do believe that Samoa is one of them. I cannot name all of them off by heart, but I do believe Papua New Guinea is also on it. And then that's just the first step of this process. The next volume will include even more countries. And so, like exactly as you say, there are opportunities out there: wind, renewable, wind, solar, even oceans. And this is a conversation we actually just had earlier, which is that in this reframing, in this new world that we are imagining, we need to be really careful not to reinvent colonialism or capitalism, that we need to really reframe how we as people interact with each other, with our environments, and how we develop.
Because, I mean, the solar technology is there. It's cheaper than chips these days, right? Wind is cheaper than coal. So, I mean, the economics of it versus having to import, you know, diesel and things like that at really high prices, yeah, which is happening in the islands. I mean, it strikes me that you probably don't have the assessment. If there was a very good assessment rather quickly on how much investment was needed to do this, then you know, this is something the COP should sign off on straight away. I mean, you know.
I do have like the rough
Sorry, I know
figure.
we're going off script here. But
I mean, you know, what good conversation ever follows a script, right? So I do believe that the figures are, it would take, for all 8 countries, it would take 1/7 of what Australia invests in fossil fuels and fossil fuel subsidies to transition fully. Yeah. 1/7.
Yeah, the fossil fuel subsidies, 1 trillion or 7 trillion, depending on the indirect. I mean, there is a bucket load of money that could, if it was removed and spent properly, could do a lot of good in the world, whilst also, you know, powering up renewables everywhere, right? And leveling the playing field in those places where it might be a little bit more prohibitively expensive for all kinds of reasons, you know. So I'm going back to the script now, which is, we've learned that Palau, Colombia, and Samoa have all very recently announced their support for the treaty. So what is needed next to happen to advance the just transition for a fossil-free Pacific and a fossil-free treaty globally? And I suppose there's an emphasis there on the just transition because, yes, people will have to have different jobs, won't they? Yeah.
I think it's important to understand that the continued extraction of fossil fuels disproportionately affects Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. Mm-hmm. We also need to acknowledge that the fossil fuel industry benefits from war, conflict, and the oppression of Indigenous peoples. We are seeing this in Palestine, we've seen this in West Papua, and so we need to ensure that a just transition to a fossil fuel treaty globally is just that, is centered in justice. Like Gemma mentioned before, a fossil fuel phase out means that no one gets left behind. So how are we ensuring that the most vulnerable are also being included in this plan?
Mm.
Yeah, just to build off Sherelle as well, is that fossil fuel phase out is already occurring. It's just unregulated. So a pillar of the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is to ensure just transition, is to ensure that no one gets left behind, is to ensure that the livelihoods and justice of Indigenous peoples, of frontline communities, those workers who work in fossil fuels aren't left behind as well. And I think that's something, the livelihood and the humanity of it is something that the fossil fuel industry tends to forget.
Just, it's Palau, not Palua. So just Palau. Yes. But I think there's nothing really more that I can add. But you know, like we hear from our grassroots communities, countries are already now coming on board. We're also hearing it from the private sector, CSO, academia, the World Health Organization. Like this movement is inevitable. You know, countries who want their interests secured, who want their voices heard, who have something to say, and particularly developing countries who for so long have been left behind in the multilateral process. This is our time. This is a process which you can have a say in. This is a process that actually really needs your voice on behalf of your people, and in particular our vulnerable communities. So get on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly in this fossil fuel phase out, I mean, it's absolutely clear that coal has to go now. So there are going to be mining jobs that are lost where the coal comes from. But at the same time, many of those coal mines are also not very healthy. They are risky and dangerous places to work. I mean, but people that work down mines often feel very proud of this job. So how you can ensure that you lift them out of the mines where they're probably having not very healthy lives and find those jobs. But I can surely see that as renewable energy is growing so fast, doubling every 3.5 years globally, right? Those job opportunities are clearly emerging as the mines go. And as you say, how you manage it there has to be a period of time where you give people the kind of, it's going in 2 years, it's going in 3 years, whatever it is, but we have a plan for reskilling very quickly and giving people more decent green jobs. And so it's actually such a positive narrative if you've got the right kind of agencies and organizations on board to deliver that. But there are also loads and loads of jobs in nature which could be deployed in restoring habitats and protecting species. There's so many green jobs out there, right? If only they could be not just imagined, but the impulse is given for them to happen. Yeah. This COP itself, I think there's 100 countries now, maybe more. There are businesses led by the We Mean Business Coalition with $1 trillion of revenue, more than $1 trillion of revenue. There's many other organizations want this COP28 to finally sound the bell for the end of fossil fuels, so fossil fuel phase out. As we say, this is critical, but then the treaty would kick in after that in a sense, or kick in at the same time, or should do, yes, to start planning how this is going to happen in a sensible way. Yeah.
My lawyer brain is very happy with these questions. So, we understand that the Paris and the UNFCCC framework is consensus decision making. As I already said about the Global Stocktake report, the commitments that have been made are far behind the ambition that we need to meet 1.5. And we're even behind on those commitments. So we need a new global framework that binds countries together, that helps them to move this process along. It has to be legally binding. It has to be negotiated by a diverse set of countries who are able to contribute to this conversation. Mm-hmm. You mentioned green jobs. You mentioned the taking into account the needs of those sectors of the community. Part of the 3 pillars of this movement are that it needs to be a just transition, it needs to be equitable, it needs to be people-centered. And then also that it has to, finance and support are a key part of that. The GST has already come out, and the IPCC as well, and they've already come out and they said that the money that goes to fossil fuels, if you divert that to the renewable energy movement, it could fund it. The money exists, it's just not being channeled correctly. Mm-hmm. The finance, the technology, the support, and even the education and the scientific knowledge that we need to make this movement, it exists. We just now need to support it, and we need to divest funds from where they are causing harm and invest them in places where they can cause good.
And we also need to activate, there are trillions and trillions of dollars in the global economy just sitting in bank accounts all over the place, earning a bit of interest, because there are people who are wondering, where should I invest it, right? We need to give a clear signal from something like this COP that this is where you invest it, yes. i.e. in the small islands or in other places that require that investment so urgently. But I suppose on the phase out of fossil fuels under the treaty, it would be wrong, for example, if the first country to phase out fossil fuels was Timor-Leste, for example. It would be better maybe if it was those people that have been enjoying the benefit of fossil fuels for, yes. Over 100 years, like one of the developed countries. Mm-hmm.
I believe it's the, sorry, I'm talking so much.
No, it's just we have a couple of more minutes, and it's just fun to explore those things.
I believe it's the International Energy Agency who've come out with their reports on 100% renewables, I believe by 2050 or 2030, they have a roadmap, and that is exactly what they say. Those who have enjoyed the benefits of fossil fuel production and extraction for the past millennia, they should phase out 80 times more faster than developing countries. They have the responsibility for historical emissions. They have already the resources and the technology that they need. At that same time, this just transition piece is so key. They cannot leave the rest of us behind. Yeah. We are all in this together. The transition to renewables needs to be one that leaves nobody, no individual, no sector, no community behind.
So lastly, as we just sort of start wrapping up here, anything else you've seen at the COP that you felt good about? Anything else at the COP you felt very, cheesed off about? Any highlights? How long have you been here, by the way, all of you?
I was on the first, I think.
We've been here since before it started.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I mean, what do you think about loss and damage? Was that a nice signal, but not enough money, really? But it's a start.
Yeah, I was at a meeting the other day, and the SG had said that all of the loss and damage money that has been pledged thus far is the salaries equal to the salaries of the 9 highest football players in the UAE. Which is a drop in the ocean. But I think what gives us hope is that Pacific Island countries, are leading the way, are showing up, are continuing to fight for our people and display what kind of ancestor we want to be for our future, that we're not giving up, that we're here, that we will keep going until our dying breath. Elder.
I love that. I think another concerning thing that we've just made known today about COP is that they released the number of fossil fuel lobbyists, which is almost around 2,500, a record number. And it's actually more than the entire Pacific Island delegations combined. So, I mean, on the one hand, it is concerning, but on the other hand, it almost shows that they're scared, right? Because they can see momentum building in the fossil fuel phase-out movement. And I think if we're able to continue on the momentum that we have been on, there is hope. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you anything that you spotted that you thought was positive or needed addressing? I mean, the tripling of renewable energy, the doubling of energy efficiency is good. There's this new pledge, the global cooling pledge to deal with emissions from cooling, because that's obviously something that's growing right now. And that seems to have the backing of the United Arab Emirates. So I don't think anyone can complain about that. I mean, it's just a no-brainer, right? If you can reduce emissions from cooling systems by 60–80%, I think it is, by 2050. You were going to say something, I thought? Oh, no, you had your microphone there. So, okay, good. I think we need to wrap up there. Thank you very much for being here.